The Wrath armada descended upon Earth's orbit like an ominous black cloud, their vast ships blocking out the stars. They were a warlike race, hardened by centuries of conquest. Each ship, a behemoth of sleek metal and advanced weaponry, reflected their superiority. They had taken planet after planet in their relentless march across the galaxy. Earth was just another name on the list. To the Wrath, humanity was no different from the other civilizations they had annihilated, primitive, backward, and incapable of defending themselves against an empire as vast and powerful as theirs. Inside the command center of the largest Wrath warship, the High Council gathered. Seated in a circular chamber, their cold, calculating eyes focused on the blue planet below. They spoke in their guttural language, their voices vibrating through the air. Earth was of no significant value to them, only a stepping stone in their greater plans. One council member, a grizzled veteran with metallic implants grafted onto his body, snorted in disdain. Another weak race. They will bow, just like the others. His tone was one of utter boredom, as if the outcome of this invasion was already determined. The leader of the council, a towering figure with a scarred face, nodded in agreement. They always bow. Their kind is the same in every corner of the galaxy, small, fragile, and driven by fear. We'll give them the usual ultimatum, bow or be destroyed. It won't take long before their leaders beg for mercy. His words were final, spoken with the arrogance of a species that had never known defeat. The Wrath had a standard protocol when dealing with new worlds. They would send an envoy to the planet's leadership, demanding unconditional surrender. If refused, they would annihilate a major city as a demonstration of their power, leaving nothing but ashes in their wake. After that, any resistance would crumble. The envoy wasted no time and broadcast a message to Earth's leaders. His voice boomed across every screen on the planet, translated into hundreds of languages. You face the Wrath. We have conquered worlds beyond your imagination, races far stronger than you. Bow before us, or your cities will burn. You have 1 hour to comply. Back on Earth, humanity was stunned. This was no ordinary crisis. It wasn't some political conflict or environmental disaster. They were facing an alien race, one that had just announced its intention to destroy them. Panic rippled through the global population. Governments scrambled to respond. Military leaders, scientists, and world leaders convened in emergency sessions. For the first time in history, all of Earth's nations put aside their differences to face a common threat. But there was no clear course of action. What could they do against such overwhelming power? As the Wrath waited, they grew impatient. 1 hour passed, and there was no reply from Earth. The silence emboldened the Council. They believed humanity was frozen in terror, too afraid to respond. The Council leader smirked as he gave the order. Begin the demonstration. Target one of their largest cities. Let them see what happens when they defy us. The alien fleet shifted, its weapons systems charging up with a low hum that vibrated through space. The Wrath prepared to unleash devastation on Earth, confident that their display of might would crush any remaining will to resist. In their minds, this was a routine operation. They had done it countless times before, and it had always worked. But as they primed their weapons, something unexpected happened. A transmission cut through the silence, interrupting the final countdown. It was not a message of surrender. It was a single human voice, defiant and unshaken, cutting through the tension like a blade. The words echoed in the Wrath command center. Come and try. The Wrath Council members froze, their arrogance momentarily shattered. They had expected pleading or silence, not this brazen challenge. The Council leader's expression darkened. He had seen many races fight back, but never had one been so bold in the face of certain destruction. Who dares? The Council leader snarled, slamming his fist onto the armrest of his command chair. The Wrath were not used to being defied. The communication officers frantically scanned the transmission source, but it was already clear: Earth was not going to bow. Not without a fight. For the first time, doubt crept into the minds of the Wrath. What kind of species would respond to imminent annihilation with such defiance? As the Wrath fleet hovered above Earth, confident in their superiority, humanity had already begun to strategize. They knew they couldn't match the Wrath in direct combat. Their technology, while formidable, was not on the same level as the alien invaders. But that didn't mean they were defenseless. In the heart of Earth's underground command centers, teams of engineers, hackers, and military strategists worked around the clock, planning a counteroffensive that would exploit the Wrath's greatest weakness, their arrogance. The first step was understanding the aliens' technology. While the Wrath had advanced weaponry and shields, their systems weren't impervious. Through captured transmissions and hastily gathered data from initial scans of the alien fleet, Earth's Cyber Warfare Division began to map out the vulnerabilities in the Wrath's communications and targeting systems. It wasn't much, but it was enough to begin disrupting their operations. In the dead of night, while the Wrath were still preparing for their grand assault, a team of human engineers launched the first strike. They didn't fire a single missile or laser. Instead, they attacked the Wrath's systems directly, through a cyber attack. It was swift, silent, and completely unexpected. Viruses designed by Earth's best programmers wormed their way into the alien network, targeting their communication lines and disabling internal commands. Ships began to drift out of formation, unable to maintain the rigid discipline the Wrath were known for. The Council aboard the Wrath's flagship could only watch in confusion as their perfect battle plan began to unravel before their eyes. "What is happening?" one of the Council members barked, his voice filled with frustration. The Wrath were not accustomed to losing control of their own fleet. It was unheard of. But here, in Earth's orbit, a primitive species had somehow infiltrated their systems. They couldn't comprehend how humans had the capacity to hack into technology far beyond their own understanding. The confusion on board the ships was only the beginning. While the Wrath struggled to regain control of their fleet's systems, Earth launched its second phase of the attack. Small, fast-moving vessels, much less advanced than the alien behemoths but highly maneuverable, darted through the gaps in the Wrath's formation. They were outfitted with experimental weaponry, designed specifically for this mission. These ships weren't there to destroy the Wrath outright, they were there to cause chaos. Using the element of surprise, human pilots harassed the Wrath fleet, targeting key systems and supply ships. The Wrath, disoriented from the cyber attacks, couldn't organize an effective response. Every time they tried to regroup, another wave of attacks would throw them off balance. Small explosions lit up the dark expanse of space as human ships struck, disappearing before the Wrath could retaliate. It wasn't a traditional battle by any means, it was guerrilla warfare on a cosmic scale. Despite the chaos, the Wrath still underestimated their enemy. To them, these attacks were mere annoyances, distractions from their real goal, destroying Earth. They assumed that humanity's resistance was a temporary inconvenience, something they would soon crush with the full might of their fleet. But with every passing hour, the situation grew more desperate for the Wrath commanders. Infiltration teams from Earth's special forces took advantage of the disorder, sneaking aboard several Wrath vessels, including their flagship. These highly trained soldiers used stealth technology and knowledge of alien weaknesses, sabotaging vital systems from the inside. Explosions rocked the Wrath flagship as engines malfunctioned and weapons systems went offline, leaving the Wrath leadership reeling. The damage was severe enough to cripple the ship, forcing it out of the front lines of battle. On board the flagship, panic spread among the Council. How could this be happening? How had a primitive species like humanity managed to breach their most secure systems and infiltrate their most guarded ships? They had dismissed humanity as weak, but now they were facing a reality they couldn't ignore. Humanity wasn't going down without a fight. But still, they didn't believe they could be truly defeated. The Wrath were too powerful, too advanced. The losses they were experiencing were minor in their eyes. They had yet to unleash their full potential, and when they did, they were certain that Earth would be crushed beneath the weight of their superior forces. The human counterattacks continued, growing in intensity. The human ships, despite being smaller and less equipped, managed to exploit the gaps in the Wrath's formation. Every hit, every tactical maneuver chipped away at the Wrath's confidence. Their once perfect fleet was now a scattered, disorganized mess. But even as the Wrath suffered setback after setback, their arrogance prevented them from fully comprehending the gravity of the situation. Finally, after hours of relentless assault, the Wrath managed to isolate and shut down the cyber attacks plaguing their systems. With their communications and targeting systems back online, the fleet began to regroup. Their ships realigned into their original battle formation, weapons systems primed and ready for the full-scale bombardment they had planned from the start. On Earth, humanity's leaders knew they had bought themselves precious time, but they also knew what was coming next. The Wrath were preparing for their final strike, the bombardment of Earth's cities. The initial successes had given Earth hope, but the sheer might of the Wrath fleet was still an overwhelming force. The victory was not yet won, and humanity braced itself for the next phase of the battle. The Wrath, shaken but not defeated, prepared to unleash their full fury on Earth, convinced that this time there would be no escape for humanity. The Wrath fleet, now fully regrouped and operational, prepared for what they considered the final stage of their campaign against Earth. They had re-established their communications, recalibrated their targeting systems, and their massive weapons array was now focused on Earth. The bombardment began, with energy weapons lancing through space, striking Earth's atmosphere with terrifying precision. Each shot was designed to cripple cities, infrastructure, and population centers. The Wrath were not here for a slow siege. They intended to bring Earth to its knees in a matter of hours. But humanity had prepared for this. As the Wrath unleashed their planetary bombardment, Earth's defenses sprang into action. Hidden in low orbit, kinetic bombardment satellites that had been in development for decades activated. These weapons, designed to launch high-velocity projectiles from orbit, bypassed the energy-based shields the Wrath were using. The satellites fired rods of tungsten and other dense metals directly into the heart of the Wrath fleet. While primitive by Wrath standards, the sheer force of these impacts could not be ignored. Several Wrath ships were crippled almost immediately, their hulls breached by the sudden strikes from above. At the same time, humanity's electromagnetic pulse, EMP, weapons, embedded in secret locations across Earth, began to fire. These EMP devices were designed to overload the advanced technology that powered the Wrath's shields and targeting systems. The pulses spread through the fleet, disrupting shield generators, causing them to flicker and fail intermittently. The once impenetrable defense of the Wrath fleet was now riddled with gaps, leaving them vulnerable to further attacks. On the ground, the real battle began. Wrath landing forces had already begun deploying to Earth's surface, expecting little resistance. But what they found was something far different. Human soldiers, equipped with years of preparation and a will to survive, had turned Earth's cities and landscapes into deadly battlegrounds. The Wrath expected to walk through undefended streets and conquer without much effort. Instead, they were met with fierce guerrilla tactics that they had never encountered in their previous conquests. In the heart of a ravaged city, a group of human fighters held their position amidst the chaos. They were outgunned, outnumbered, but determined. Their faces were grim with resolve, their bodies bruised from hours of fighting, but they refused to retreat. Using the city's maze-like layout to their advantage, they set traps, used high-rise buildings to ambush Wrath patrols, and engaged in brutal hand-to-hand combat when necessary. What the Wrath had not accounted for was humanity's intimate knowledge of their environment, and their ability to adapt under extreme pressure. Each skirmish left more Wrath soldiers dead or injured, further confusing the invading force. The Wrath had always relied on their technological superiority to overpower their enemies, but here, on Earth, that advantage seemed to count for little. Human fighters were using everything at their disposal: improvised weapons, the terrain, and their sheer will to survive. The Wrath were shocked, not only by the level of resistance, but by the unyielding tenacity of these so-called primitives. Every time they thought they had the humans cornered, another ambush or trap would send them reeling. As the battle raged, it became clear that the Wrath had miscalculated. They believed that once they initiated the bombardment, humanity would crumble, perhaps beg for mercy. Instead, the humans fought harder. The Wrath leadership, monitoring the situation from their warship, began to grow desperate. For the first time, they faced the possibility of failure. It was unthinkable. A species they had dismissed as weak and inferior was now pushing them to the brink. They could not afford to lose. Not here, not against humanity. In a last-ditch effort to break Earth's spirit, the Wrath decided to launch an all-out assault. Every available resource, every soldier, every ship was directed toward Earth. The fleet intensified its bombardment, aiming to reduce the planet's defenses to ashes. Ground forces launched massive offensives, throwing everything they had at the remaining human strongholds. The skies lit up with fire, and the ground shook with the impact of the Wrath's assault. For a moment, it seemed like the Wrath would succeed. Earth's defenses were stretched thin, and human forces, though fighting valiantly, were beginning to falter. Cities lay in ruins, communications were sporadic, and the Wrath pressed their advantage. Across the globe, battles were being fought with desperate intensity, and in some areas, the invaders were gaining ground. Human forces were pushed to their limits, and yet they refused to yield. In the midst of the chaos, a message was sent from the highest levels of Earth's Defense Command. It was a single word: activate. Hidden on the far side of the moon, a fleet lay dormant. These were not the cutting-edge warships the Wrath were accustomed to, nor were they equipped with the advanced technology that characterized the alien armada. Instead, this fleet was a testament to human ingenuity, built in secret over decades, designed for one purpose: survival. These ships were heavily armored, loaded with the last of humanity's secret weapons, and ready for one final push. As the Wrath focused all their efforts on the planet below, this hidden fleet emerged from the moon's shadow. With the element of surprise on their side, the human ships launched a coordinated attack on the Wrath's flagship and the surrounding vessels. Kinetic weapons tore through the Wrath's weakened shields, and precision strikes targeted the command centers of key Wrath ships. The fleet, once an overwhelming force, now found itself outflanked by an enemy they hadn't even known existed. The Wrath's commanders, caught completely off guard, scrambled to react. But the damage was already done. Humanity had used its final card, and it was paying off. The hidden fleet tore through the Wrath lines, creating chaos and confusion. On the ground, the news of the fleet's activation spread quickly, reinvigorating human forces. Soldiers fought with renewed determination, knowing that victory, once thought impossible, was now within reach. Just as the Wrath believed they had the upper hand, the tide of battle shifted. The invaders, now facing an unexpected threat from above and a relentless enemy on the ground, began to falter. What was supposed to be a quick and decisive victory was turning into a catastrophic defeat. The Wrath's final assault, meant to crush humanity's spirit, had only ignited a fire that could not be extinguished. With the full might of Earth's hidden fleet unleashed, the Wrath found themselves in a situation they had never anticipated. They had assumed that humanity's resistance would crumble once the planetary bombardment began, but now, as retrofitted warships emerged from behind the moon, their confidence wavered. These ships were old by galactic standards, but they had been rebuilt in secret, outfitted with advanced weaponry and shielding technologies that had been developed in the shadows for just such a moment. The human fleet moved quickly, far more agile than the Wrath's massive armada. What humanity lacked in raw power, they made up for in precision and adaptability. The battle turned into a brutal space dogfight, with human ships darting in and out of the Wrath formation, targeting key command vessels with pinpoint strikes. The Wrath's technological superiority, which had once seemed unassailable, became their weakness. Their large, heavily shielded ships were designed for overpowering enemies with brute force, not for dealing with nimble opponents who could exploit the gaps in their defenses. Earth's forces, both in space and on the ground, fought with a level of determination that the Wrath had never encountered before. The humans weren't fighting for conquest or glory, they were fighting for survival, and that made them far more dangerous than any opponent the Wrath had faced. Civilians, soldiers, engineers, and scientists all took part in the final defense of their planet. In cities across the globe, people banded together, turning their urban landscapes into fortresses. Improvised traps, sabotage, and guerrilla tactics made every inch of Earth's surface a death trap for the alien invaders. The Wrath had believed that their sheer numbers and overwhelming firepower would be enough to subjugate humanity. But now, As their ships were picked apart in space and their ground forces were ambushed at every turn, they began to understand the true nature of the species they had challenged. The Wrath had always seen themselves as predators, but now they realized they were dealing with a prey that could fight back with a savagery and resilience they hadn't anticipated. The turning point came when one of humanity's experimental ships, a sleek, stealth-capable vessel armed with cutting-edge energy weapons, penetrated the Wrath's defensive perimeter and struck the heart of their fleet. The ship's primary target was the Wrath flagship, the nerve center of their entire operation. In a daring and coordinated assault, human pilots executed a complex series of maneuvers that allowed them to bypass the Wrath's defensive grid and deliver a crippling blow to the command ship. The flagship exploded in a burst of light, sending shockwaves through the Wrath fleet. With their leadership suddenly gone, the remaining Wrath forces were thrown into chaos. Their communication systems, already weakened by earlier cyber attacks, failed completely, leaving the fleet without clear orders or direction. The disarray that followed was catastrophic for the Wrath. Their carefully coordinated assault on Earth unraveled, and their once imposing fleet began to scatter in a desperate attempt to regroup. On the ground, the Wrath soldiers, who had once moved with disciplined precision, were now isolated and leaderless. Human fighters, emboldened by the destruction of the flagship, pressed the attack with renewed vigor. Civilians who had once been huddled in fear now joined the fight, arming themselves with whatever weapons they could find. The Wrath had never imagined that the civilian population would resist with such ferocity. They had expected Earth soldiers to fight, but not the everyday people. This unexpected resistance only deepened the Wrath's realization that they had grossly underestimated the humans. As the battle raged on, it became clear that the Wrath were no longer fighting for victory, they were fighting for survival. What had started as a campaign of conquest had turned into a desperate struggle to escape with their lives. The humans, once seen as weak and insignificant, had turned the tide of battle through sheer willpower, innovation, and an unyielding refusal to be dominated. In the final moments of the conflict, the remnants of the Wrath fleet began to retreat. Only a few ships remained intact, and they fled the battlefield with all the speed they could muster. As they limped away, the Wrath sent one final transmission back to their empire, a warning, not of defeat, but of a far greater danger than they had ever imagined. "Do not return to Earth," the message read. "This species is far more dangerous than we could have ever believed. They fight not for power, but for survival, and they will stop at nothing to defend their world. Do not challenge them again." Humanity, battered but victorious, stood on the precipice of a new era. The invaders had been repelled, but the cost had been high. Cities lay in ruins, and the scars of the battle would be felt for generations. Yet, amidst the destruction, there was a sense of triumph. Humanity had faced an enemy that had sought to destroy them, and they had fought back with everything they had. They had not only survived, they had won. But the victory was not without its lessons. The Wrath had been a powerful enemy, and there were surely more threats like them lurking in the vastness of the galaxy. Earth could not remain complacent. The technology they had developed in secret, the tactics they had used to defeat the Wrath, these would become the foundation of a new era of human warfare. The days of humanity being seen as a weak, insignificant species were over. In the aftermath, as Earth's leaders gathered to assess the damage and plan for the future, one thing was clear: humanity would never again wait for an enemy to strike first. The fight against the Wrath had shown them that they could no longer be passive, no longer hide behind the idea that they were alone in the universe. If there were other threats out there, humanity would be ready. As the story closed, there was a hint of what was to come. Humanity, no longer content to stay on the defensive, was preparing to take the fight to the stars. They had beaten the Wrath, and now they would be ready for whatever came next. The message had been sent loud and clear: underestimate humanity at your peril.